My name is Mark, and I grew up in a small, worn-out town in the northeastern United States. Our family's story isn't one of luxury or privilege. It's a chronicle of hardship, constant sacrifice, and the relentless effort to survive. My father, John, worked long shifts at a local manufacturing plant, and my mother, Mary, devoted her life to keeping our household together under conditions that were anything but ideal. Even from a young age, I learned that every day was a battle against poverty. Our modest rental home, with its drafty rooms and creaking floors, became the setting where I first understood the weight of financial insecurity and the sting of not being enough. I remember our mornings vividly. The sound of an old, sputtering refrigerator was the only indication that another day had begun. We rarely had the means for a proper breakfast. Even a simple cup of coffee was considered a luxury. Every decision, from paying utility bills to scraping together enough money for groceries, came down to a painful calculus of survival. I'd sit at the chipped kitchen table and listen as my parents discussed whether it was wiser to pay the electric bill or buy a bag of fresh apples. Those early years instilled in me a deep sense of responsibility and an acute awareness of every financial shortfall. Our family was larger than most in our neighborhood, and the constant struggle was shared by 4 children. The weight of our collective poverty was not only measured in dollars, but in the constant reminders from neighbors and even strangers. I recall countless moments at school when I overheard classmates whisper about our worn-out clothes and the unmistakable sin of hardship that clung to us. In a world where material success was praised and every new gadget celebrated, our lack of resources made us feel invisible, a constant reminder that we were on the fringes of the American dream. Living in a community that appeared to thrive in comfortable homes and polished cars only deepened our sense of isolation. While other families could boast of new appliances and well-kept lawns, we often had to make do with second-hand items and a deep-seated feeling of inadequacy. Every cracked window and malfunctioning heater in our apartment was a physical reminder of the many sacrifices my parents had made. I began to understand that our challenges were not just about money, but were woven into the very fabric of our everyday existence. The relentless pursuit of stability in an unpredictable world became our silent, shared ambition. As I matured, the burden of responsibility weighed more heavily on my young shoulders. With each passing year, I took on more work, delivering newspapers, waiting tables at a local diner, and even mowing lawns to help ease the financial strain. Despite my best efforts, the underlying reality remained. Our family was caught in a vicious cycle of scarcity. The American promise of opportunity felt like a distant rumor. I watched my peers enjoying the privileges of suburban life and began to resent the fact that my family's struggles were seen as our inherent flaw rather than the outcome of a broken system. The notion of the American dream had always been extolled in our town, yet for us, it was a mirage. We were constantly reminded that success was measured by the material trappings of prosperity, a criterion we could never meet. The constant comparisons to our better-off neighbors filled our hearts with both longing and bitterness. It wasn't just about money. It was about the perception that our poverty defined our very identity. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel the weight of judgment in every sidelong glance and every dismissive remark. It seemed as if the world had already decided our fate before we even had the chance to prove our worth. Despite all this, my parents instilled in us an unyielding determination to hold onto our dignity. I still recall a bitter winter evening when my mother, shivering in a threadbare sweater, told me, "Mark, remember that we are a family. No matter how hard life gets, our unity is our strength." Her words echoed in the cold silence of that night, sparking a fire within me, a promise that no matter how many obstacles we faced, we would continue to fight for our place in this world. That promise has driven me ever since, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. In retrospect, those early years of struggle taught me invaluable lessons about perseverance, empathy, and the true meaning of family. Our modest beginnings, marked by daily sacrifices and quiet resilience, laid the foundation for the person I would become. I learned that while the world might judge a man by his outward appearance or his bank balance, true worth was measured by the courage to face adversity head-on. And so, in a town that never offered us a hand up, we forged our own path with grit, determination, and a fierce loyalty to one another. Every day in our lives began with an unspoken battle, a struggle to simply exist in a world that seemed determined to overlook us. I would wake up each morning to the sound of our ancient refrigerator's groans, its rhythmic complaints echoing the challenges that lay ahead. In our cramped apartment, breakfast was never a lavish affair. It was often just a piece of toast and a weak cup of coffee, consumed quickly before the day's responsibilities began to weigh on us. Our lives were governed by routines that left little room for error, as every minute of the day had to be carefully managed to keep our fragile household afloat. At my part-time job at a local diner, I was constantly reminded that I didn't belong to the world of comfortable middle-class existence. In between orders and shifts, I would overhear my coworkers chatting about weekend getaways, new cars, or recent vacations, luxuries that seemed like fables to me. Their cheerful banter underscored a harsh reality. I was different, and not in a good way. It wasn't long before the whispers of the poor kid began to circulate among patrons, each comment slicing through my already fragile self-esteem. The diner's neon lights and cheerful decor did nothing to dispel the feeling that I was an outsider in a world designed for those with more. Outside of work, the struggles multiplied. Our dilapidated apartment, with its creaking floors and barely their insulation, was a constant reminder that we were living on the edge. As winter crept in and the wind howled through poorly sealed windows, my mother would wrap herself in layers of old clothes, determined to keep us warm despite the odds. Each day was a negotiation between maintaining a semblance of normalcy and battling the harsh realities of economic deprivation. It wasn't just a matter of missing new clothes or a modern home. It was the constant exposure to a world that placed value on appearances and material wealth. The neighborhood we lived in was a mixed bag of newly renovated houses and time-worn structures like ours. Every time I walked to school or the corner store, I was acutely aware of how different we looked compared to our more affluent neighbors. The worn fabric of our clothes, the outdated sneakers, and even the lingering odor that hinted at long days without proper laundry marked us as outsiders. I remember once, while waiting in line at a popular grocery store, I overheard two shoppers muttering disparaging remarks about those folks who couldn't even afford proper hygiene. That moment crystallized for me the deep-seated prejudice that seemed to accompany poverty, a prejudice that went far beyond financial hardship and seeped into the very way people judged our worth. Social inequality wasn't an abstract concept for us. It was a daily assault on our dignity. Every interaction, be it a curt nod from a store clerk or a dismissive glance from a neighbor, served as a reminder that we were considered less than. At school, I saw firsthand how children, influenced by societal biases, ostracized anyone who didn't fit the mold of what was deemed successful. Even simple acts, like playing in a park or joining a local sports team, turned into arenas of silent judgment. The unspoken rule was clear. If you didn't have the right clothes, the right possessions, or even the right sense of prosperity, you were automatically excluded from the community of the normal and the worthy. Inside our home, the constant barrage of discrimination and the weight of public scorn began to tear at our spirits. I could see the strain on my mother's face each time she set out for errands, her eyes downcast as she avoided any unnecessary attention. My siblings and I grew up too quickly, each of us learning to mask our pain with forced smiles and quiet acceptance. Yet, beneath the surface, resentment and sorrow festered. We longed for a day when our family would be seen for our resilience and our determination, not merely for our poverty or our unkempt appearance. The daily struggles we endured took a toll on all of us. It was as if every harsh word, every cold stare, chipped away at the little self-respect we managed to preserve. In moments of quiet reflection, I would question why the world was so quick to judge based on surface appearances. Why should the sin of hardship, inevitable in a life lived without financial security, be the basis for exclusion and ridicule? This constant internal conflict bred a resolve in me to prove that our value could not be measured by material standards alone. Even in the midst of relentless adversity, I began to understand that our strength lay in our unity and our unwavering commitment to one another. In this crucible of daily hardship and social inequity, I discovered an inner fortitude that I never knew existed. The relentless pressure to conform to a society that valued wealth and outward appearances forced me to look inward for validation. I realized that true worth came not from what one possessed, but from the perseverance and character forged in the fire of adversity. I'll never forget the day that altered the course of our lives, a day when a routine trip to the local supermarket turned into an experience that shook our very sense of dignity. It was a chilly morning in early November when my mother decided that we desperately needed fresh produce and dairy products. The small grocery store, with its fluorescent lighting and neatly arranged shelves, had always been a place of necessity rather than comfort for us. That morning, as we pushed open the heavy glass doors of the store, I could sense that something was amiss, though none of us could have anticipated the severity of what was about to unfold. As soon as we entered, the atmosphere seemed charged with an unspoken tension. While the store looked immaculate, every aisle we passed through reminded us of our differences from the typical shopper. We moved quietly, aware that our threadbare clothes and the faint odor of hard labor life made us conspicuous among the polished displays of goods. The store's patrons, many of whom were dressed in the latest fashions and carried the air of casual affluence, rarely exchanged a word as they shopped. I recall glancing around nervously, feeling the weight of every judgmental stare fixated on us, a reminder that we did not belong. It wasn't long before our presence caught the eye of the store manager, a tall, impeccably dressed man whose name tag read Mr. Harrison. His expression was stern, his eyes cold as he surveyed our family with a mixture of disapproval and disdain. In that moment, every detail of our appearance, the worn-out jackets, the mismatched shoes, even the lingering scent that betrayed our inability to maintain regular hygiene, seemed to strike him as intolerable. Without a trace of empathy, he strode directly toward us, his polished shoes clicking on the tiled floor as he approached with deliberate, measured steps. "Excuse me," Mr. Harrison said in a clipped, businesslike tone, "but your appearance and odor are not acceptable in this establishment." His words, sharp and uncompromising, cut through the soft hum of the store. My mother attempted to speak, her voice trembling as she tried to explain that we were simply there to buy food for her children. But Mr. Harrison was relentless. His tone left no room for negotiation or understanding. He reiterated that our presence compromised the store's standards and that we were, effectively, not welcome. In that harrowing moment, time seemed to slow. I could see the shock and humiliation etched on my mother's face, and the silent, tearful expressions of my siblings said everything about the gravity of our loss. The other customers watched in a mixture of discomfort and quiet curiosity, as if witnessing a scene from a cautionary tale. It wasn't just a personal affront, it was a public shaming, a declaration that we did not fit the mold of acceptable society. The cold efficiency with which Mr. Harrison and his staff escorted us to the exit left an indelible mark on my soul. Stepping back out onto the chilly sidewalk, I felt the biting wind mix with a wave of shame that threatened to overwhelm me. The contrast between the sterile interior of the supermarket and the unforgiving reality of the street was stark. Every passerby seemed to cast a judgmental glance our way, deepening the wound that had just been inflicted. It was as if the entire world had conspired to remind us of our supposed inferiority, and there was nothing we could do to change that painful truth. That day at the supermarket was not merely an isolated incident. It was a microcosm of the relentless prejudice that defined our daily existence. The experience left me with a profound sense of anger and a burning need for self-affirmation. I began to question why, in a nation that prides itself on freedom and opportunity, a man in a suit could so casually strip away a family's dignity over something as inherent as our appearance. The incident transformed my inner world, igniting a spark of defiance that would come to shape my future. In the days and weeks following that fateful encounter at the supermarket, the sting of humiliation began to spread through every corner of our lives. The manager's cold dismissal and the harsh whispers of strangers haunted my every thought. At night, when the house fell into a heavy silence punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic, I would replay that moment over and over in my mind. The memory of Mr. Harrison's stern face, his tone devoid of any kindness, became a constant, oppressive presence, a reminder that in our society, being different meant being ostracized. Sleep became elusive as my mind wrestled with the intensity of my emotions. I felt anger, shame, and a deep-seated sorrow that I struggled to articulate. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the faces of those on the street, their looks of contempt burning into my memory. The experience was not confined to that single moment. Its repercussions seeped into every aspect of our lives. I found it increasingly difficult to meet the eyes of friends and acquaintances, fearing that each look might mirror the disdain I had experienced at the supermarket. At home, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. My mother, who had always been our family's pillar of strength, now appeared haunted by the incident. I would catch her sitting by the window for hours on end, lost in thoughts of what might have been or how we could possibly recover from such a public degradation. The pain was not only personal but communal, a shared burden that strained even the closest of bonds among my siblings and me. We began to withdraw into ourselves, each of us grappling with the emotional aftermath in our own way. In the midst of this emotional turmoil, I started to question the fairness of a system that seemed to thrive on such cruelty. I wondered how a society that preached equal opportunity could allow for the casual dismissal of human dignity based solely on appearance and scent. This inner conflict led me down a path of introspection and self-examination. I read books, attended community meetings, and sought out stories from others who had endured similar indignities. Each narrative added fuel to my determination to reclaim the dignity that had been so brutally stripped away from us. Yet, The journey was not without its internal battles. Every time I attempted to muster the courage to stand up against the systemic injustice that plagued our lives, the memory of that humiliating day pulled me back into despair. The internal struggle was relentless, a tug-of-war between the desire to fight back and the overwhelming fear of further rejection. There were nights when the anger inside me threatened to boil over, only to be smothered by a paralyzing sense of futility. It felt as though every step forward was met with the same walls of prejudice that had once forced us out of the supermarket. Gradually, though, I began to see that the real battle was not waged on the streets or in public spaces, but within my own heart. I realized that reclaiming my self-worth required a shift in perspective, a recognition that no one's judgment could define who I was if I refused to let it. Slowly, I started to engage in small acts of defiance, participating in local forums on social justice, volunteering at community centers, and even speaking out about my experiences whenever the opportunity arose. These actions, though modest, were the first steps in rebuilding the fractured sense of identity that had been battered by years of humiliation. Our home, once a place of quiet resignation, began to transform into a space where conversations about hope and change could take root. My family and I started to share our feelings more openly, discussing our dreams and the possibility of a future where our worth was not determined by our outward appearance. It wasn't an easy road. Old wounds take time to heal, but each small victory, each act of courage, contributed to a growing sense of empowerment. I learned that the path to self-acceptance was paved with both struggle and perseverance, and that every moment of vulnerability could eventually be transformed into a source of strength. In the end, I came to understand that while the scars of public humiliation might never fully fade, they did not have to define us. The true measure of our character lay in our ability to rise above the hurt, to forge a path forward in spite of the obstacles, and to continue believing in the possibility of a better tomorrow. That realization became the cornerstone of my internal revolution, a promise to myself and to my family that we would not let one bitter encounter dictate the rest of our lives. In the quiet moments that followed the storm of our public disgrace, I found myself lost in reflection, trying to piece together the lessons embedded in our painful experiences. I spent countless hours contemplating the harsh reality that had been thrust upon us, that in America, a country celebrated for its promise of freedom and opportunity, one could still be reduced to an outcast simply because of the circumstances of one's birth. The words of Mr. Harrison continued to echo in my mind, a relentless reminder of how society could devalue a person based solely on appearances and the unavoidable marks of poverty. In my search for meaning, I began to connect with others who had suffered similar indignities. I attended support groups and community gatherings where people shared their own stories of discrimination and rejection. These meetings became a lifeline, a space where the pain of exclusion was met with understanding and solidarity. Hearing the stories of individuals who had been cast aside by the relentless forces of prejudice filled me with both sorrow and determination. It was in these moments that I truly realized we were not alone. The struggles we faced were part of a much larger tapestry of injustice that needed to be acknowledged and overcome. As I listened to the accounts of others, I also began to see the transformative power of resilience. Each story was a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure, to learn, and to eventually rise above the circumstances that had once seemed insurmountable. I took solace in the belief that the adversity we endured was not a permanent state, but rather a challenge to be met with courage and self-belief. I immersed myself in literature, art, and discussions that celebrated the strength born out of struggle, and gradually, I found the seeds of hope sprouting within me. In time, I started to shift my focus inward, understanding that true change had to begin with self-acceptance. I began to dismantle the negative narratives that had been imposed on me, choosing instead to embrace every facet of my identity, even those that society deemed unworthy. I worked on rebuilding my self-esteem, step by determined step, and in doing so, I discovered that the greatest revolution often starts within one's own heart. Conversations with my mother and siblings grew more honest and raw as we laid bare our fears, our regrets, and our aspirations. Together, we resolved that our past, no matter how painful, would not dictate our future. Today, when I look at the faces of my family, I see a reflection of quiet strength and a fierce commitment to overcome. Our experiences, though marred by moments of public shame and deep-seated prejudice, have also taught us the value of resilience and the importance of unity. I have come to believe that every insult, every dismissive glance, and every act of exclusion is not the end of the story, but rather a call to rise up and affirm our inherent worth. The journey towards self-empowerment is ongoing, but I now walk that path with a renewed sense of purpose and a steadfast belief in a better future. In the end, I hold on to the hope that our story, painful as it may be, can serve as a beacon for others trapped in similar cycles of rejection. It is a reminder that while society's judgments may wound, they need not break us. For in our shared struggles, we discover not only the harsh truths of prejudice, but also the boundless capacity for compassion, change, and ultimately, redemption. Every day, I choose to believe that the spark of hope within us can ignite a broader transformation, a transformation where every individual is valued not for their outward appearance, but for the strength of their character and the depth of their spirit.